Hello, and welcome to the overview of Behavior Intervention System. My name is Allison Olivo, and I'm a content specialist with Michigan's MTSS Technical Assistance Center. The purpose of this recording is to provide a brief overview of the Behavior Intervention System that you'll be working to install in your school. By the end of this recording, you should be able to describe Tier 2 and Tier 3 and define an intervention system and its 9 components. Our agenda for today aligns with these outcomes. In order to make sure that we all are using common language and have a common understanding of what Tier 2 and Tier 3 are, we are going to spend a few minutes talking about them. As we move into Tier 2 as part of the intervention system, it is critical that we make sure that our Tier 1 is strong and effective. When Tier 1 is not implemented well, we will have more students needing more support at the Tier 2, or the targeted intervention level of support, and at the Tier 3, or intensive level of support. We can't intervene our way out of a Tier 1, or core instruction, universal problem. Our systems can't support more than about 20% of our students needing intervention beyond the core instruction. A great question to ask is, are at least 80% of our students successful with our Tier 1 supports? If yes, you can manage the number of students who need behavioral intervention typically. Because we don't have the resources or staff to successfully provide interventions if a high percentage of students need them, we end up having to create larger intervention group sizes, use less qualified interventionists, and provide less support to the interventionists. So strengthening Tier 1 and keeping Tier 1 going really well is critical. With the students who do require and receive intervention, we want to increase the intensity of our behavioral supports and get a sense of urgency about producing successful outcomes for students. We should always work toward and expect to be able to close the gap between expected standards and the student's current level of performance, and we should be relentless in our pursuit of that for all students. We have no time to wait. When I say increase the intensity of our behavioral supports, what does that mean? What does that look like? First, it means that we are getting really precise about what the student needs. What is the exact skill or set of skills that the student needs? For example, rather than just say that the student doesn't get along with others, we want to get more precise. Like, the student is unable to tolerate or know how to respond to a peer who is disagreeing with him. Now we can provide skill-specific intervention. Increasing the intensity of behavioral supports should always include providing more instruction, more engagement, more opportunities for practice, and more frequent and immediate feedback. Tier 2 seems to be the tier that has the most variety of definitions and the most misrules. We want to make sure that we are all on the same page when it comes to defining Tier 2. Tier 2 is for students who have need for more behavioral support beyond Tier 1. Interventions are selected from a validated intervention platform versus things like just making accommodations, which falls within Tier 1 effective instruction. Interventions include specialized instructional procedures, duration or length of time, and frequency, how often the intervention is provided. Tier 2 also includes a set of core features that help us identify if a support is considered Tier 2. The first is that the additional instruction or the intervention is provided in targeted groups of students with similar needs. It should always include increased structure and more frequent and specific feedback. Getting students into a Tier 2 intervention should be quick, like within 72 hours, and the intervention must be matched to the needs of the student. We should see more data collection and data analysis in order to adjust our intervention. Remember, we should have a sense of urgency, and data will help us do that. And lastly, Tier 2 support should include increased family engagement. Let's do a quick check on your understanding of Tier 2. Find something to write on and number it 1 to 7. Read each description and decide if yes, it is Tier 2, or no, it is not. Write down yes or no for each item. Go ahead and pause the recording to do this, and then you can check your answers when you resume play. Items 3 and 6 are most likely considered Tier 2 supports. They both contain the core features of Tier 2. On the right side, we see things that are most likely not Tier 2. Tier 2 is not individualized intensive interventions. That is Tier 3. Tier 2 serves targeted groups of students with similar needs. Tier 2 interventions are always provided as a supplement to Tier 1, never in place of. If a school counselor provides social skills training for the whole class, that would be considered a Tier 1 or universal support, since all students are receiving it. Making accommodations is just good instructional practice within Tier 1, and fewer practice opportunities, less instruction, but higher expectations is definitely not Tier 2. Now let's define Tier 3. Tier 3 is individualized, intensive intervention that should be provided for about 3 to 5% of the students in a school. In Tier 3, the validated interventions from Tier 2 are still implemented, except now there are data-informed, individualized adjustments to those interventions. There are no special Tier 3 interventions per se. Progress monitoring occurs during the intensification of intervention to evaluate and adapt or adjust the intensity of the intervention based on student needs. And Tier 3 support typically involves a team with training and expertise in the intervention or the intensification, as well as the student's family. Here are a couple of important reminders. Tier 3 includes both students with and without disabilities. There are a lot of misrules about this. Tier 3 is not only for students with an IEP, and it does not exclude students with IEPs. Tier 3 is also not a place or a label for a student, so we would never refer to someone as a Tier 3 student. In the same vein, Tier 2 is inclusive of students with and without disabilities. Keep this in mind. Students with IEPs are first and foremost general education students. Federal law, IDEA, makes that very clear. All interventions and supports available to students within the school are also available to students with IEPs. Now that we have defined Tier 2 and Tier 3, we are going to do a brief overview of the intervention system and its components. An intervention system provides a means to ensure efficient, effective, and equitable access to intervention supports for behavior. We will be talking a lot more about having an efficient, effective, and equitable system as you move through the training sequence. The intervention system has 9 components listed here on this slide. Go ahead and take a second to read through them. We will be doing a quick highlight of each one. There is a tool that will be introduced to you during your first training session that will guide your development or installation of your intervention system. The Behavior Intervention System document describes and gives details for each of the 9 components of the intervention system. School teams can capture decisions about the details of their intervention system within it. Now let's do a really quick walkthrough of the 9 intervention system components. Component 1 is team structure. Just as there are many responsibilities related to installing and implementing Tier 1 school-wide PBIS, requiring a school leadership team to coordinate, lead, and manage, the same is true of the intervention system. A team is needed to oversee this work. For most schools, the same school leadership team that leads the Tier 1 school-wide PBIS work will also lead the intervention system work. This requires ensuring that you have the time and space to meet as a team, which may require coordination with your district's central office administration. Since it is likely your team is also the Tier 1 school leadership team for school-wide PBIS, you can choose how to handle the additional responsibilities. You can have 2 separate meetings, one focused on Tier 1 and one focused on the intervention system, or you can schedule a longer meeting with a portion dedicated to Tier 1 work and the other portion dedicated to intervention system work. Component 2 is identifying students in need of intervention. There are 3 parts or sets of decisions related to identifying students. One is establishing your assessment system, or the what, who, and when of collecting student data. Next is how and when existing students in your school are identified as needing intervention, such as after a screening window. And lastly, how, who, and when will new students who move into your school be efficiently identified if they are in need of interventions? All of these decisions regarding identification of students will need to be made to ensure all students have timely access to interventions. Component 3 is the intervention grid. This is a critical, pivotal, foundational tool that provides an at-a-glance view of all the interventions available to students within your school. It provides detailed information about each intervention so that it can be used to efficiently, effectively, and equitably match a student to intervention. We will be coming back to the intervention grid during the Tier 2 Behavior System training session. Intervention System Component 4 is placement and grouping. There are a number of considerations your team will be working through, such as maximum group size for your interventions, communication with families about intervention, and an intervention scope and sequence of sorts to address the progression of skills and needs. These will all need to be contextualized for your school. Interventionist training and implementation supports is the fifth component of an intervention system and addresses initial professional learning for staff providing interventions, as well as making sure that implementation of interventions is supported through provisions of things such as having materials readily available, co-facilitation to support a new interventionist, and modeling the steps of an intervention to ensure good fidelity of implementation. Component 6 is fidelity. This component, as with several others, spill over and across all of the components. As a team, you will be contextualizing decisions about the who, what, when, and how of monitoring the fidelity of the implementation of specific interventions. Students can't benefit from interventions that are not implemented as designed. The team will also be monitoring the fidelity of the intervention system, much like you have been measuring fidelity of your Tier 1 school-wide PBIS through the school-wide PBIS Tiered Fidelity Inventory. The school-wide PBIS Tiered Fidelity Inventory also has a scale for Tier 2 and Tier 3. Component 7 is data use and analysis. This component is all about systematizing how data in your school is used, how it is communicated and to whom, who analyzes it when, and how you use it. Your district's central office administration may already provide some standardized processes around universal screening, identifying students for intervention, collecting progress monitoring data or fidelity data. Your team will be responsible for not only systematizing these practices, but also contextualizing how the communication around data flows, who is doing what. You will also be monitoring system-level data around the intervention system, including making sure that students who need intervention have access and that the interventions provided are effective and actually making a difference. Component 8 is really more about that individualization that occurs at Tier 3. It addresses how we intensify interventions to students who are either not responding to intervention, despite good fit and good implementation, or have significant and immediate needs. We will not be going into this piece quite yet, but it is an important part of an intervention system. Component 9 is another one of those components that spill over and across all the other components. It addresses communication between the school leadership team and other groups, as well as between the school leadership team and central office administrators or a district-level team. That's your broad overview of a systematized behavior intervention system. Thinking about all of the components and pieces and parts can be overwhelming. The good news is that you'll have additional training and support along the way, including access to specific tools and resources. Thank you so much for your time and attention as we walk through this introductory overview. And thank you for all of your hard work as you work to install and strengthen your intervention system.